Hello and welcome to Season 6, Episode 15 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
And we are, of course, reading James Hitchcock's History of the Catholic Church from the Apostolic Age to the Third Millennium, picking up where we left off last week with the chapter on Reason and Revolution. Last week we kind of set the stage for a lot of the sort of political occurrences going on at this point in time. Now we're really getting into the scientific revolution, and there's a good section here. I thought it was really good on the French Revolution and what that meant for Catholicism, and sort of ends with the age of Napoleon with this chapter. I thought this was a great chapter, really entertaining, really informative.
Yes, if the murdering of nuns is entertaining.
I don't know if entertaining was not the right word, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I would have appreciated a little bit more in depth about the French Revolution, but I guess once you to explain how they are horrible.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're just kind of beating a dead nun at that point. To mix a metaphor. I don't know what that was. Because like beating a dead horse, but
yes, beating a dead
French
nun.
revolutionaries would certainly have murdered and did murder nuns.
Yes, that is true.
Priests, anybody who is devoutly religious.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what I'm always struck by, and we'll get to it. That's towards the end of this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always struck by the people that always think that, well, they're never going to come after me.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go get those bastard Catholics or that out group. And they don't realize, well, the same reasoning applies to you Protestants or Jewish people or whatever. Of course, the Jewish people are always persecuted and all that kind of stuff, which I'm really, I'm amused by this most recent controversy involving, Hamas murdering Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the Jewish state is making a mistake by not just stating, we will not invade and destroy Gaza if you issue an unconditional surrender. Yeah. Like we did to Japan and Germany. And I mean, I think it's implied, and everybody knows that that cult of death known as Hamas would never unconditionally surrender. But I think they need to make a bigger deal about that before they invade and say, hey, look, you unconditionally surrender. You turn over all your leadership and all the people involved in this, and you turn over all the hostages unharmed, and we're not going to murder all of you. Otherwise, you get what you get, and you don't throw a fit. As you would tell a little kindergartner. Anyway, but anyway, back to my amused thing. And I don't know if I should say amused, but the one thing that I don't know really enjoy it, but the one thing I give close to enjoyment with regard to the transgender thing is how it affects the women's supremacist movement, also known as feminism, because it forces them to acknowledge the reality that men have certain advantages, generally. Yeah. And, physical and that kind of stuff, that we're all God's children. We're all of equal value, but if you play the averages, men are stronger and that kind of stuff. And that's why we have to have a different category of women's sports, because they cannot compete with men generally.
True. Very true.
But anyway, so I'm amused by that, although it's discouraging, because I know it's like, they're coming after the feminists now, but then they're coming after us later at the same time. But I'm amused to that same degree with regard to liberal Jewish advocates who were, all over the MAGA people as if we're anti-Semitics and all that kind of stuff. And they realize, oh my God, all these people that we're marching with want to kill us. If you just ask them, we want you dead too. But first we got to get those, white Christian guys out of the way. Those religious Christians and MAGA people, you got to get them out of the way, because we all hate them. But we hate you almost as much, or we have to get them out of the way before we can kill you. And you can see these people. There's a video that was circulating of a young girl on campus, and one of the college campuses, I can't remember what it was, and she was so distraught because she's saying, I just feel so alone now. All my friends are revealing themselves to be people that would celebrate my murder.
Yeah.
And it's just shocking to them. They don't realize those Marxists and
Mhm.
communists and Islamists,
Mhm.
they don't like the Jews at all,
Well, what's wild to me is I don't know if you saw it, but the most recent insurrection at the United States Capitol with the pro-Palestine supporters, they were all
Right.
Jews. There was a Jewish group. There were rabbis there that were like the Free Gaza people, and they sat down in one of the House office buildings, and all 300 of them were arrested.
Yeah.
And it's like, why
It,
why would you be the ones
well,
protesting that?
those are a particular sects of publicity hounds.
Mm.
So they're like the Catholics for choice. They're
Oh
not.
yeah.
Yeah, Catholics for choice aren't Catholics, right?
Mhm.
They're people that aren't even probably Christian.
Yeah.
But they get attention because they're Catholics saying they're pro-abortion and that the Bible supports it. This is a similar type of really
That makes sense.
out there small group of publicity hounds. But how many of them are going to get the 15-year sentences for trespassing like those other people,
Yeah.
on January 6th? And,
Mhm.
it's that kind of stuff makes my head explode because you saw all these protests, for the last couple of years, especially like the George Floyd but even go
Mhm.
back to Michael Brown,
Yeah.
and people were burning down communities
Mhm.
and not even prosecuted. And then you have this, they call it an insurrection. It was really a riot,
Mhm.
but it lasted a couple hours.
Yeah.
And so what delayed the impeding a government function? Yeah, for like 4 hours. That Trump ain't the president. But anyway, so. It's that does get to me because I'm like, it's so patently obvious that our criminal justice system is so politicized, and it makes me, as somebody who never really thought of the validity of it. I think I mentioned this before to you. I don't know if I was on the podcast, but I have some a little bit of problem with the conspiracy theories about the racist criminal justice system.
Mhm.
When I see it so patently political bias, I'm thinking, man, what if they have a point?
Mhm.
What if that system is biased again? So all those kind of weird conspiracy theories, like the JFK assassination, which
Yeah.
back when I was born in the 70s, so like in the 70s and 80s, even in the 90s, it's like if you thought there was some person on the grassy knoll kill JFK or second shooter, third shooter, you thought it was a government conspiracy, you were a nut. You were like tin foil. But now I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure the CIA did it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's multiple people. I mean, why aren't they releasing the files? I mean, there's
Yeah.
nobody alive today that would be affected by the release,
Mhm.
and certainly wouldn't be protecting methods and of intelligence. But anyway, so we're going way far afield.
Yes.
But all of it is related to the French Revolution because it's the
Mhm.
same kind of attitude of that we know better.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
we can create a God, and we can create a perfect society, and,
Mhm.
and there's no such thing as original sin, which we'll get to in a minute. So
Yeah.
let's start with the scientific revolution.
Mhm.
And I'm going to breeze through, I think, a lot of this stuff,
Yeah.
but it's so important. And of course, some of the major players. If you have just kind of a 10,000-foot view of the scientific revolution as it applied to the Catholic Church, you know about Copernicus and about Galileo and about the heliocentric, or the sun being the center of the universe rather than the Earth, because
Mhm.
and it was I don't know, it was never in the New Testament that the Earth is the center of the universe. But there's anyway, so there's some, I think, Old Testament um, uh, provisions, I guess, in the Bible that suggest the Earth is the center of the universe, but.
Mhm.
But certainly there was Copernicus way back in 1543. I had a hypothesis that that was basically trying to overcome the mathematical anomalies that
Mhm.
that you would arrive at with the Earth-centered universe, because as you observe things, you realize, well, it's not.
Mhm.
And so then, there's some controversy about that, but it was, I think, mostly in the academic field. And you have Galileo, who was 1615. He published his paper initially, if I have the date right.
Mhm.
It was basically a Copernican hypothesis, but I think, if I remember correctly, his was, one of them was, well, the planets revolve around the sun, but the sun revolved around the earth, which I don't think is of course is not correct, but they're trying to, square the observations you can make with telescopes with some religious theory. But, eventually, what we're trying to do is, and I like that the author confirms that for really as far as I know, the entire history of the church, the official view of scientific endeavors was that faith and reason must ultimately harmonize. You got to come to a point where the observable reality harmonizes with scripture and the word of God and religion and all that kind of stuff. Any thoughts about that introduction to the scientific revolution in the Catholic Church?
Yeah, I think that was a good point. But I mean, just to hammer that home, I mean, it makes sense. If you're a Catholic, you believe the universe was really engineered by a supreme God who's supremely intelligent. You would think that all of faith would then line up with empirical reason based on observation of that universe. That has been the Catholic belief for like he says, I think its entire history.
Right. And I think I misstated. It was the Jesuits responding to Galileo that were saying that the planets revolve around the sun, but the sun revolves around the earth.
Yes.
I think I get that somewhat confused. And the Jesuits were the most highly educated and well-respected thought leaders at the time. So moving along to scientific progress, and of course there's as people experimented and studied things, there were controversies, like something as simple as dissecting human bodies, for scientific research. Is that appropriate? Is that something that should be done, or should you preserve the body and bury the body, so to speak? And then, the geologists are figuring out, wait a second, this timeline that you have from Genesis or those other older books of the Bible don't quite jibe up with, what you're finding is the age of the earth. So all those things are, coming to the forefront and more. And so, you end up with, and we talked about this in a previous podcast, Descartes, where he has he always reminds me of Socrates, because Socrates is like, well, you question everything. And, he always asks all these questions. And his ultimate conclusion was, well, we don't really know anything. And because I realized that first, that I'm the most brilliant philosopher. So Descartes was kind of like a similar thing. We have to question everything. And that's kind of like the era that he was in and was leading, and it was very influential. Cartesians doubt everything. But ultimately, I guess just to summarize or get to his conclusion, he as a thinking person, he couldn't doubt himself. I think, therefore I am. So if he is a sentient being able to question reality, then he must exist. He was also, I think, a very devout religious person,
because he made the argument that if he God is an infinite being, but therefore a finite mind could not comprehend something like that. We could not even think of that to begin with. So therefore, there has to be an infinite being that created the finite mind. Otherwise, it would be impossible for us to even conceive of such a thing, was his argument.
Correct. Right. And he also espoused the belief that there's a separation of the physical body and the mind or the soul. And so that he articulated that pretty well. And Francis Bacon was somebody that I think argued with Descartes, or Descartes' theories, if I remember correctly. An English lawyer, and he believed that you should have faith beyond an empirical proof or disproof. That's what faith was. That's what religious belief was. There's something beyond just does it all add up type of thing.
And the author makes an interesting point, because he says, both Descartes and Bacon wanted to protect religious belief, right? They weren't saying that religion was to be just ignored, but in doing so, by making it so separate from like scientific reason, by making just a different thing, they also made it like irrelevant in a way, which I think is a big issue that we've seen, especially today. Kind of, what is that, like 300 years later after these guys, 200 years later, we're still seeing that, where, people are like, oh, well, religion is just irrelevant to the sphere of science. Two entirely separate things. You can't bring any sort of moral arguments into what people claim to be scientific theories, and it's still something we're struggling with today.
Well, it's 500 years. We're talking about the 1600s.
Oh, true. True.
So yeah,
400 years.
Well, 20.
Francis Bacon died in 1624. So
you're right.
Almost exactly 400 years.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So, and that is, and I think we're going to get to this. I think I have notes on it, but that you're going to have religion one way or the other, and the scientific theories become their religion. But then there's a mention of Newton, and with his theories of motion and gravity and all that stuff. Very brilliant guy, Anglican, devout, and he believed, which a lot of other scientists believe, and that basically the argument about intelligent design that you just mentioned. That it's so orderly that somebody would have had to create it, and there's certain laws of physics that all things follow, and so that to him and to other devout scientists, but they believe that that just proves there must be a God, a creator God, kind of thing. I'm interested in Pascal, who is the next person discussed in the book, and I need to read the book that I have of Pascal, which is Pensies.
Yes,
not penis.
Nope, not that.
Did I tell you that?
You did tell. You said that last week. Yes, you said that last podcast.
And I was talking to a guy at the radio station. So I, in addition to this, almost not listened to podcast. I have a local AM radio program that's bi-weekly.
Yes,
that is also almost not listened to.
I have 3 FM radio programs that are almost not listened to.
Well, I listen to you should put a plug in for your.
That's true.
Program. That's a really good. You did a very good job on that. Well,
Thank
mainly
you.
because you don't have me there, it up. But you have a very good presence as a radio announcer.
Well, thank you.
On Monday nights from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. You have
Central Standard Time. Yeah, you can tune in. Yes, so the first show from 8 to 9 p.m. full vinyl records of jazz. That's jazz in the grooves, and then from 9 to 11 p.m. Bishop's Soul, Rhythm and Blues Review, which is same format, full vinyl records, but soul, R&B, and blues on 88.7 KTRM if you're listening from the Kirksville area, or you could tune in online at tmn.truman.edu.
Well, I had to get I had it on TuneIn Radio last year, but it's not on TuneIn Radio anymore.
Oh, interesting.
It's now on Simple Radio. So if you the app Simple Radio, you can tune in and listen to some good jazz and R&B.
Or you can stream it live from the Truman website.
Yeah, you can actually stream my radio program at KJFF every other Monday at 8:30 a.m. for a half hour.
Oh, there you go.
Legally speaking. Anyway, back to my point.
Yes.
The gentleman who works at the station, who is kind of my partner, he actually works the board and talks, kind of helps me through muddling through the program. Anyway, he and I got to talking about, before we got on the air, philosophy and religion, that kind of stuff. And he had been a seminarian for a period of time.
Oh, really?
But he's been married to somebody I know for many, many years. Great guy. And we started talking about religion and philosophy and stuff. And you wouldn't expect that in a, getting ready for an AM radio program. But and I mentioned the Penzies story, and he thought that would. Anyway, so anybody who's interested in that can rewind from last week.
There you go.
Not really worth the effort. But Pascal, who was a great mathematician, that's how everybody else remembers him. But he was also a devout religious person, studied probabilities. And I did not know this, that he associated with gamblers because he was studying the science of probabilities. So I guess if you're interested in studying those concepts and really trying to figure them out, that'd be a good way to get a start, is to talk to professional gamblers. And he has he formulated the famous wager to convince libertines to embrace the faith, that if God existed, they gained everything, whereas if he did not exist, they lost nothing. And that's a quite a common tactic that people use with atheists. I remember people were doing that with Christopher Hitchens, who is a well-known atheist, prominent speaker, really brilliant guy, and he got cancer, and I really appreciated him because he he defeated the argument that which does not kill you makes you stronger, because he was in the middle of the chemotherapy and radiation treatment. He's like, it has not killed me, but it has made me much weaker. So, and he always had a wonderful sense of humor. But the people would try that, the wager argument with him, and he's like, I'm not going to bet on it. It's either it exists or it doesn't. Yeah. And so it's like a risk reward, I guess, argument. But if you're making that wager, do you really believe? Are you going to win? Are you going to win the wager if you're just making a wager? And so it doesn't really.
I think it's it's a good way to get people to at least look into something else. I don't think it's an end all be all of like, this is going to convince everybody to believe in God. But it's like, what do you lose? If you're talking to an atheist, what do you lose by at least looking into the beliefs, of Catholicism or generally just Christianity? What do you lose from that? You lose nothing, and if you do continue, then you gain everything. If you do believe in this, end up believing in God.
Yeah, you just waste your time, I guess.
That's true.
It's like, why bother?
That's true.
I mean, that's what an atheist would say. But what else are they going to do? They got nothing else going on. They're just killing time till they die. I mean, really. I don't know how. I mean, atheists must live. I mean, I've met several, but most of them always turn out to be deists of some sort of lazy. There's, it's very hard to find a true atheist, a devout atheist, which is really what they become. Anyway, what else do I want to tell you about Pascal? He started writing this book, which Pensies, which are just thoughts, because he never got done with it. He was a man who had a lot of physical ailments.
Yeah.
And wished not to be cured, because he thought that was the natural state of himself by God, which seems kind of crazy to me, because I mean, I don't know that he had a possibility of being cured, but I think he was asked for that.
Yeah.
But what else do we want to talk about? His philosophy. I guess part of him was a forerunner of modern existentialism. Basically, that a lot of the scientific thought was that man was dethroned from being the center of the universe, that there's other mechanical things, and we're more of a physical body. Yeah, we may not have already realized before that, but
I think it is worth mentioning that really Pascal was one of the last Christian philosophers, one of the last major Christian philosophers to set up some sort of new thought. For hundreds of years, because after this, it's not really Christians coming up, or Catholics, I should say, coming up with new ways to interpret the faith. It's more so Catholics just trying to defend their faith now wherever possible, sort of moving past the heyday of Catholicism where everybody's Catholic and you find new ways to think about it, and more so just finding ways to fight against either Protestantism or atheism going forward.
That's true. It's true. Trying to shore up the faith rather than really trying to get a deeper understanding of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. All right, so another theme of the scientific revolution was this more of a critical history, a study of history, a reassessment of the church's past, trying to figure out whether or not certain books of the Bible were properly attributed to the right author. I'm trying to remember. Let's see, but there was author mentions the great controversy caused by the French oratorian Richard Simon, who was expelled from his order after publishing a book denying that Moses was the author of the Pentateuch, and anticipating modern biblical criticism in other ways as well. So, that kind of scientific inquiry into the scriptures, which I think was a similar inquiry was done in previous centuries, but this is more of like, well, we can know it or not, rather than, opinion, more of an analytical fact base. Was this written by this one person at that time? But I don't think that was the first time that those issues were discussed.
Yeah.
So the Enlightenment. which I used to think was such a great thing, but
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think so anymore.
Yeah, a lot of it I do, as far as moving the scientific method forward and all that, but I think it's going to go on forward anyway.
Mhm.
Really, what you end up with is a lot of deism.
Mhm.
A lot of questioning of the role of the church, role of the rules and the hierarchy and the
Yeah.
traditions
So,
of the church, especially the Catholic Church. You have other thoughts about
yeah.
that?
I was just going to say, just to say deism is just the idea that, God was like an engineer, created this world, and then basically left, right? And then that's just the general deist principle. They recognize there has to be some sort of prime mover. There has to be somebody who engineered this very complex universe. But then they don't see any evidence for God continuing to exist. And so that's where really a majority of really like the scientific thinkers, a lot of like the important political thinkers of this time go to. I know Thomas Jefferson, particularly notable deist in at least American history.
Yeah, and the author does a good job of bringing up the fact that all the religious conflict that we've been talking about that occurred over the previous 200 years or so prior to this era really undercut the faith.
Mm-hmm.
It makes a whole lot of sense. Like how do you believe in these religious tenets when people are murdering each other
Yeah.
for it? And then the national religions, the prince
Mm-hmm.
deciding, and then everybody else has to be expelled or go to
Mm-hmm.
prison. And then it just it created a growing skepticism of Christianity
Yeah.
and of religion in particular. And what does that mean? Well, even if you're somebody that believes in God, it's like, well, okay, wait a second, is this really God's plan, or is this he
Mm-hmm.
set this in motion and we're screwing it all up?
Yeah, it's really
Uh,
kind of like the perfect storm at this moment where, you have the growing, scientific inquiries that say, hey, maybe these long held beliefs about the Bible and, heliocentrism and geocentrism and stuff like that, maybe those things aren't true. And you also have, like you said, those, past 200 years of just religious conflict. And then as well, sort of the modern idea of the nation state is now kind of more at its prime than it's ever been, where you're not just having, vast geographic lands, held by one king, but people, more so seeing themselves as like a nation and stuff like that. And of course, then the prince decides, sort of what is the religion of this area. And of course, then you sort of have the decline of princes and kings totally with modern democracies sort of rising up. And so
yep,
a lot of stuff happening to minimize the importance of religion.
yep. But even in as the author points out, even with this new era of skepticism about the church, there's still a persistence of the faith, which is the next section of his book. The Catholic Europe still appeared to be stable and relatively serene within the confines of the Catholic areas. Once the terrible wars are moderated down a little
Yeah.
bit. And this era, there became a pronounced appeal to the imagination and the emotions of the faithful. So you have this kind of separation between really devout, very emotional, like a lot of these orders coming up, the Sacred Heart societies, and I didn't know that this was the era when the newly established Stations of the Cross came into effect. I didn't know the time period of that. And then different piety and Marian piety theories and the kind of emotional religion of the heart, as the author describes it. And then so it's kind of interesting contrast between the so-called cold-blooded intellectuals on one side and then the really devout, very emotional people on the other side.
True. Very true.
And then a lot of people a little both.
Mm-hmm.
So then there's a section of saints, which always tells us, kind of what's going on at the time. There was a better appreciation of Saint Joseph around the period of time, and the author, I didn't know this. The author thinks that this, or states that this was really, the Saint Joseph really wasn't popular until more modern times. I guess people just didn't really care about him. Of course, as a father, I have more respect for him.
Yeah, I've heard that too. I've heard that, before Saint Joseph, really like the top, male saint, I guess, like as it appeared in the Catholic Church that the most people, sort of venerated, would have been Saint John the Baptist, as sort of the top, male figure, of course, preceding Jesus, and everything like that.
Yeah, I don't really identify with Saint John the Baptist.
Yeah, I don't too much either, but
in my youth I might have, but I'm not one to go out and in a toga and baptize people by myself.
True. Very true.
But like Saint Joseph was just like a steady hand.
Yeah.
At least that's what I view him.
Mhm.
He's visited by the angel, and I don't. Doesn't the Bible say he didn't even tell anybody? Didn't
Yeah.
tell a soul, and he's really the patron saint of stepdads.
Yeah.
I
That's true.
think that's a lot of his popularity nowadays.
Yeah.
Because there's so many these what they call them blended families.
Mhm.
I won't even tell that story.
All right.
Well, I'll say this: I was at a work function for your mother, and the subject came up. I was talking about the blended families came up
Mhm.
too, but it was a social event, so I'm on my best behavior.
Yes.
I am there to support your mother
Mhm.
and not to cause arguments or anything. But there was a discussion of a royal court, like for prom or dances,
Mhm.
and now they're not doing king and queens; they're just doing royalty.
That's what we have at Truman.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm very proud of myself that I did not mock or insult anyone as part of the
Oh,
conversation. And I just thought,
congratulations. That's great.
yeah, I mean, I consider that a gift to my wife. I said, that's a creative way to address that particular issue. Oh, yes. Anybody else need another drink? Yeah. I'm gonna go get. I'll be back. Yeah, that was something else. Anyway, so going on to Saint Alphonsus Mary Liguori. There's a Liguori. There's a Redemptorists. They had a house here or whatever you call them. It wasn't really a monastery, but they had that in Imperial, I believe, right next to St. Joe's.
Yeah.
They did a bunch of publications. I don't think it's there anymore. I think they sold it.
Interesting.
The Redemptorists. I think so. I know Liguori had something here in their county. Anyway, so Liguori was a major influence on spirituality, emphasizing Christ's love and that of Mary, whom he venerated as the mediatrix of all graces. And he believed in fervent prayer, freely embraced, and that fervent prayer, freely embraced, brings salvation. So that kind of passionate belief. And also was famous for saying God is not a tyrant, and advising confessors from being overly inquisitive. So don't really try to press people, let them confess and move on. So it's kind of a more pleasant priest than some of these, these other thinkers of the time. Don't you think?
I would agree.
So then there's a section that the in this era the author describes the royal court culture. I think the main point of this section is that there's kind of a merging of traditional marriage and courtly love, basically kind of harmonizing that. So allowing people to marry for love and not have arranged marriages, and I would think that would be more conducive to less affairs. And
I would imagine.
I don't like this guy. I like that guy. Eventually something's going to give, or not, I guess. It would be true, I guess. But it would seem like it would be a lot easier to stay married to somebody you love and are attracted to. But who knows? I don't know. So there's a long discussion, and this really kind of flows into the French Revolution eventually. Gallicanism, which I wasn't familiar with at all. I didn't realize they really set up kind of a subset of Catholic Church, which Gallicanism was really the king of France had this ultimate authority over the church in France.
And this has been going on for a few centuries now. I didn't realize it had such a long influence either. I hadn't heard much about it, but
agreed. Me too. And so, just talking about I guess it was Louis the 14th who was that long ruler, and of course he consistently nominated bishops for political reasons. He was a king. He didn't see there's anything wrong with that. The discussion of these Louis the 14th and 15th and 16th, but Louis the 14th was devout, and he had a really bad conscience about all the adulteries he was having. And so he would sit there and he would be chastised by the bishop from the pulpit. Like, I guess he just said, "You dirty whore," or whatever. And the briefly banishing one of his mistresses from court after a priest refused her absolution. So it's a weird mix.
Yeah.
But the church was heavily involved in politics, even though they seemed to have this weird kind of independence with regard to whether they're absolved his sins or not. But the patronage and family connections still meant a great deal, and getting a promotion in the church in France. The seldom were parish bishops were seldom parish priests, but were drawn from the ranks of the cathedral canons and professors. So you don't have people rising up on their merit from the regular parish priests. And I think a lot of the era, if I remember correctly, the parish priests would tend to be more destitute and just at the mercy of the bishops giving them money or allowing the money to flow down to them, and that may or may not happen. But the author makes pains to say that the most of the clergy were conscientious.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a super majority or a bare majority. I don't know, but of course the priests at the bottom were pretty resentful of the huge disparity in income between themselves and their superiors, and it tends to explain some of the problems that the church had internally during the French Revolution, because you had some badass priests that were all for overthrowing the hierarchy. Yeah, it had a lot to do with it because there's so much luxury and so much wealth from the church that the author mentions that the church owned about 10% of all the land in France.
Yeah,
more than half of that in Bavaria. I don't know why he mentions Bavaria. I guess, but because that would be over in Germany, right?
Yeah. So,
but I don't know how close it is. I guess it'd be pretty close to France. But the church did, provide for the needs of a lot of the poor, and some. It gives an example of a Spanish archbishop feeding 1,300 people a day during a famine. So some of those funds were used for good purposes, I guess you'd say.
Some of them.
Yeah. Of course, the priests, the bishops, the author says, I think, understates it. The quality was uneven. That's one way to say it. But there were certainly intellectual defects, which is the next section I'm at, 26.
Yeah.
Where they weren't really great thinkers, as you mentioned earlier. We're not talking about great philosophical advances part of the Catholic Church, but they're really just weren't really able to argue against the people that were saying, well, this is a corrupt system, or that there's no evidence for this faith-based system. Any thoughts about that?
No, I think that's very true. Good summary. And of course, that's where you get the philosophes coming up after this, which is what the next section is. In lieu of all of these Christian thinkers, somebody's going to keep advancing in whatever their philosophy is. And so he talks about these, philosophes is what they called themselves. The term philosophes means not philosophers, but something like the modern term intellectuals. So they developed all of these secret societies, which I'm sure you have notes and comments about.
I have some, like the Illuminati. You'll hear weird conspiracy theorists talking about the Illuminati. They exist, and they're like a multinational secret society that's controlling the world. You often hear the Illuminati referenced in people that are anti-Jewish because they think Jews are part of an international conspiracy, and the Illuminati, the chosen people, the enlightened people. But and you're right. I like how the author describes this. And he says, here it is, middle of 327. I'm going to read it. Despite their deism, the emotional need for religion survived in those societies which incorporated ritualistic, semi-mystical elements into their rational creeds. And that's always the case.
Yeah.
It's always the case. They have these weird, and and if whenever you join a men's group, you'll see this. They have these weird ceremonies that are like pseudo religious. Now, of course, Knights of Columbus have, but it's a specifically religious group, and And really, it's just a bunch of out of shape old men, and they put on these funny little costumes. No matter which group you're in, but and you're sworn to secrecy, so I cannot tell you, what happens.
Mm-hmm.
But I've been initiated into the Knights of Columbus years ago, and I'm also an elk. And the elks, they had a ceremony, but it was pretty understated. But there was a gentleman that I knew pretty well that passed away, and he was a Shriner, and they have a funeral service, and so at the visitation, not at the his funeral, it wasn't a mass, he was not Catholic, but they came in and they had a ceremony. It was actually pretty nice. And they have like a script that they followed. I mean, I don't mean it like a derogatory script, but they had thing that they read talking about the person's life and service and going to heaven and all that kind of stuff. So, but they're all and I think they're affiliated with the Freemasons, Shriners, I think, aren't they?
Oh, I don't know. I thought they were different organizations. I thought that the Shriners were like the ones that tried to like have like, I know like a lot of Arabic sort of like styled rituals and stuff. Because don't they wear fezzes? Isn't that a thing? That the Shriners are the ones that wear fezzes. One of them wears fezzes.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not a member of any of them. I'm still waiting for the Knights of Columbus to become the armed wing of the Catholic faith. And I think what is it? This is the Shriners. I know one of them was condemned by. Wasn't it in here? Freemasonry was condemned by the succession of popes. So I think we hate the Freemasons.
You're right. The Shriners are based on Masonic principles.
Bam! Look at me. Right. Yeah.
But the Freemasons I know explicitly are like anti-Catholic to a degree, or at least were in the past. I don't know if anyone who's like a Freemason today in the United States is really, calling up the rallying cry against the Catholics. But no, for a long part of their history, they were very, very anti-Catholic.
Yeah. Well, somebody had asked me if I was going to join the Shriners or some other group. I don't know if it was Freemasons. I don't know if there's any around here, but it was a Shriners. I'm like, no, I'm a member of the Knights of Columbus. I think we hate you guys. Yeah.
Well, the Freemasons are active in Kirksville. Every single one of our academic buildings has a Freemason logo. And we have a giant, the tallest building in Kirksville that's not like on campus is the Masonic Temple.
Yeah. Well, are they active? Because there's a Freemason insignia in the sidewalk on the corner of my office in Hillsborough.
Well, I guess I don't know if they're 100% active. I mean, their building is still there; it's not vacant. So I'm assuming they do something there.
Might understand this. The Freemasons love buildings. They're Masons. They have that little insignia in a lot of buildings. Yeah. And of course, the founding fathers, I think, were all Freemasons.
Yeah.
Which anyway, a lot of conspiracy theories about that too. What was that? The Nicolas Cage movie?
National Treasure.
Yes. I think he talks about that stuff.
Yes.
Anyway, so moving along to the war on tradition, which is what these philosophies, I've never heard about that term before reading this book. Literally never. Have you? Never heard of it. I mean, I've heard of these other people and groups and stuff. I never heard that term, or I ignored it. So, of course, they openly question the legitimacy of any institutions, or almost all of them. And they believed in rational thought, which is fine as far as that goes. But I like how the author says their big quote would be, "We stand on the shoulder of giants." Talking about great thinkers and previously lived. But the author says, but they ignored the fact that most of those giants have been believing Christians. You dummies. So. I don't know. Do you want to say anything else about that topic, or we move on?
I think that's good. We can move on to the enemies of faith, which is, of course, very tied to the war on tradition, of course.
Oh yeah, and this is really prominent in France, and the French Revolution. Those were really, really bad people, and there's so many people in America today that are very similar to them, and in Europe too, that really are really talking about the same philosophical beliefs. And wanting the same political system, and it's really kind of scary that one of my favorite commentators, Victor Davis Hanson, is often talking about how the Democratic Party is turning into a new group of Jacobins.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Voltaire.
He's the big one.
Died in 1778. not a day too soon. I don't know how old he was. He was around for a little while, but he was very much into this. He was actually educated by the Jesuits,
Mm-hmm.
but he believed that the church was really the enemy of mankind, and let's see, what else did he say? He was exiled several times. He was in prison at least 7 separate times.
Mm-hmm.
And he had this belief that only the educated could be trusted, with knowledge and belief, because they're the only ones that even understood it.
So, of course, he was like one of the most wildly influential philosophers on the French Revolution. Nobody can be trusted except this, core group of intellectuals. And then, of course, the definition of what an intellectual is changes. And, of course, then you end up with Robespierre being, guillotined as well, even though he was one of the founders. But we'll get to that a little bit later.
Yes. Robespierre, really despicable person, and an attorney. And anyway, so the enlightened Catholics, and really the French Revolution started off slow, and then all of a sudden, bam! It hit like a certain level of change, and then it got out of control. So you had the situation where France was really struggling because there was some bad harvests and all that. There are a lot of economic stressors on the system, and it wasn't set up to be an efficient economic system either. But there was an urgent sense within the Catholic Church that in France, that and elsewhere, that there had to be some sort of reform of the government. But there was there was a seminary that rioted, and there was a seminary that attempted to stab. I'm trying to think. Stab the rector in his bed. Benedict the 14th at first praised some of Voltaire's work, but he later condemned it. And Voltaire dedicated his book to Muhammad to the Pope, who at first did not comprehend that Voltaire's ridicule of Muslim beliefs as absurd as a way of insinuating the same thing about Christianity. So it just somebody that's hostile to the Catholic faith and the Christian faith in general. And of course this group of philosophies savagely attacks the Jesuits as ignorant bigots, but of course the Jesuits were better educated than most of them.
Yeah.
And so they they have a compilation of great works. I think they call it the Encyclopedia, and so the Jesuits created a similar grouping called the Dictionary.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. So the Renaissance humanism, which sounds like a great idea, the belief in humans are good and all the wonderful things, but they came to the weird belief that the ancient pagan culture had been superior to Christianity, which I think you have to be somewhat ignorant of world history to believe that. And there's a reference here to Edward Gibbon in his book, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, which I'm still plowing through slowly. But it's like reading almost a foreign language, because he is a really intelligent guy, and it was written in, I guess, the 1700s. And so the way he phrases everything makes it hard to read, for me at least. Anyway, but the reason why he's mentioned is because he has this history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, and he's attributing a great deal of the reasons for the decline was the Christianity's influence on the Roman Empire. That somehow it degraded its political structure, and then I think there's some truth to that.
Yeah.
But of course, it also corrupted the Catholic Church too, because it joined up the church with the state.
Yeah, the author does also mention he partly built on the research of Catholic scholars like Mabillon, while ignoring their belief in a divine purpose in history. So he's again one of those guys who's drawing on all these Catholic thinkers while removing whatever their Catholic belief was in doing this research, and is always kind of building on them while decrying the Catholics as the reason that we don't have this intellectual force anymore, which is absurd.
Yep. And what I like how the author points out that this belief of these people at this time, these prominent thinkers was that progress requires destruction of the old order.
Mm-hmm.
You have to destroy the old order to create the new one, as opposed
Yep.
to trying to reform or improve the current order. And that's really what we're looking at today in modern society. And it's very, 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 in my opinion, very, very similar to the French Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
What we're looking at now, because you have the religious authorities. Every authority that was respected in my youth has been undercut by those same authority figures over the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
And so you don't have those institutions
Mm-hmm.
have been denigrated, and people don't believe in them anymore. And so that lets loose questioning and overthrowing the current structure, because you don't believe in it anymore.
Yeah.
And the same thing happened in France, as they're describing, these newer philosophers and thinkers saying, well, we need to have a non-religious belief system. That they hated the atheists too.
Mm-hmm.
But because they believed in some sort of deist, some sort of entity that created the world.
Yeah.
They just thought that, and they thought atheism was just ignorant, because, of course, something had to create this world.
Mm-hmm. I like the discussion. I don't know if you were going to get to this here, but on the new morality and natural man, which is kind of what you're getting to here. But he mentions there's kind of an enlightenment sexual revolution in which common violations of the sixth commandment were justified. So pornography, for the first time, became a thriving industry. He also mentions Marquis Donatien Alphonse de Sade. I'd never heard of this guy, but I've heard of the thing that's named after him.
Marquis de Sade.
Yeah. I've never heard the name, but I've heard of the term that he's named after. He said he perpetrated rape and torture on servant girls and tried to elevate his vices into a philosophy of life, and that became known as sadism. So I've heard the word, I've just never heard of the guy. And of course, he died in an asylum. Good. Horrible man.
Yeah, he's a prominent aristocrat, Marquis de Sade. Yeah, I don't know anybody that called him this whole name, but he was a known figure in pop culture, at least in my youth. As he's kind of like Nero, Fiddle While the Rome Burned, when Marquis de Sade was a torturer and a rapist and all that stuff. But you see the similar thing in our modern American society with this new morality, where you cannot. It's immoral to say, you probably should not have 3 wives.
Yeah.
You're just being judgmental somehow. Like you're not. If I told you I was a Irish Catholic Republican, you're not going to be judgmental. Of course you are. But in your religion, what you're doing is good, and what I'm doing is bad.
Yes.
And so you're seeing the same thing now with this, and we've noticed this throughout history of the church, that you have these eras where there's a breaking down of the old order. There's always a new sexual morality. It's like an outbreak of hedonism every time, and it's
a good thing that couldn't happen to us now. There's no way that could be a thing that's occurring in the modern day.
It's exactly what's happening, and it reminds me of the Old Testament, with Moses goes up to the mountain. He's up there for a while, and the Jews are waiting, and then they make the golden calf and all that kind of stuff. He comes down, and he's like, so it's a similar thing. It's like, well, there's a breakdown of the old order, and they don't trust the old order. It's this human thing, and we're in the middle of it.
And of course, it's all based on this idea of the natural man. All of these, intellectual thinkers in the Enlightenment saw that, before organized human society, state of nature was good. It was a perfect time, prior to corruptions. And it's only because we have these institutions that brought about, all of these human evils. That's the only reason, people are bad. That's exactly the same rhetoric we're seeing now. If it wasn't for, America and slavery, everything would be perfect and we'd have complete equality. Or if it wasn't for, Christians and blah, 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 then we'd all have equality and we'd all be perfect, and et cetera, et cetera. Capitalism, I think, is the big one that everybody, decries now on the left, as, capitalism is now the root of all evil to a lot of people.
Yeah, and I would go in even a little further. It was when people really studied earnestly chimpanzee behavior. It was like in the 60s or 70s, that they were expecting like an ideal society, like a pure, there's no sin because they're animals. And then they're aghast that they would have infanticide, they had murder, they had rape, I mean, like what we would consider rape. if they were human. And so that this whole idea, and Hobbes, I think especially, had this idea that a state of nature was pure, and we have to figure out a society that we can kind of return to that state of nature. And they rejected the Christian and Catholic ideal or idea of inoriginal sin, that we're all sinners, and we have to overcome that through prayer and sacrifice and with withholding certain vices from ourselves. And so we have those what is the word, licentiousness,
yes,
that they really believe in. All right, so let's talk about the Catholic divisions, which facilitated this crazy time. And I alluded to it earlier, about these priests that were kind of being mistreated by the bishops and all that. But you also had, some people saying, well, the parish priests, they're direct descendants of Jesus and the disciples too, so they had authority separate from the bishops. I mean, why are they having to take orders? Aren't they successors to Jesus? Aren't they performing mass, that sacrifice with the parishioners? So that undermined things. Let's see, what else did I have in here?
Yes, I have the German bishop Johann Nicholas von Hontheim, who wrote under the name of Justinus Febronius, thought that the Pope was just kind of a presiding officer in the church, and holding that diocesan bishops received their authority directly from Christ. So again, this idea of, whatever sort of country you're in, that can really change whatever authority, the church has. And of course, that plays into the Gallicanism, as if you're entirely separate from the papacy. You can kind of do whatever you want with your own diocese or with your own parishes, etc.
Yep. So it leads logically to what the author calls enlightened despotism. So you have a contempt for traditions. The rulers wanted to reorganize everything to kind of centralize power. They redrew diocesan and parish boundaries, essentially, seized excessive wealth from the church, abolished holy days because it interfered with work days, changed the seminaries and supervised them in the schools, and had the attitude that monastic life, which was just a contemplative life, was just ideal and was a waste of time and money. And so that kind of enlightenment undermined all those ideas. And then at the same time, in 1731, Prince Bishop of Salzburg expelled all the Protestants at that time. And there's a synod in Pistoria, Italy, and there was a bunch of turnover, and the bishop had to resign after certain decisions were made. You see this undercutting of religious authority, which leads to let's see, Emperor Joseph II is the next one I have in my notes. It ruled 1765 to 1790. So that's the time we're talking about. And he adopted the Febronian principles, and he was such a mandated so many different specific things. He was called the sacristan. How do you pronounce that? The sacristan, because he mandated the number of candles on the altar. That's micromanagement at its best. He closed 700 monasteries. He changed the calendar. He redrew boundaries. He would not allow the publishing of papal bulls, which I guess would have condemned him anyway. He supervised the schools and seminaries, and he had state control of the church, and that was considered Josephinism. And he was
Josephinism, yes.
Josephinism, and he was unpopular for all these so-called reforms.
Yeah, what I'm kind of noticing is throughout all of this, if you substitute the word enlightened for inclusive, I think these exact things are exactly what we see in the modern day. Changing the seminaries or changing the schools to be more enlightened, whatever that means, is exactly the same thing as changing the schools to be more inclusive. I think that's exactly because they both essentially mean nothing at their core. Whatever it is, it's just whatever sort of the social policy of the left is whatever enlightened / inclusive it means to these people.
Yeah, that's a good point. Really good point. I didn't even thought about that correlation. So then what all that leads to also must be, you got to get rid of the Jesuits, because at the time they were loyal to the Pope and considered not disloyal to whoever the local leader was. Yeah. So the monarchs, were pretty pretty hostile to them generally anyway. So in Portugal had a really bad problem because in 1758 somebody tried to kill the king and they blamed it on the Jesuits. So he expelled or imprisoned all of them. And there was one that the author mentions, this is the quote, one was even strangled and burned as a would-be regicide.
Mm-hmm.
So which was it? I mean, did they kill him and then burn him? Or were they strangle him unconscious and then burn him to kill him? I don't know.
I'm guessing strangling probably came first. It'd be hard to strangle him if he was burned.
It would be, yeah, you don't want your hands, I guess. It's like, oh, let's strangle this guy. Who set him on fire? That hurts. My hands are on fire. That's a definition of overkill. Strangled and burned him. Yikes. So there's a long discussion of Jansenism. Didn't we already talk about this?
We did talk about the Jansenists, but now seeing what they're doing here.
So both the king and the Pope condemned them because to hell with them, I guess. And so they let's see. They believed in freedom for the truth possessors, which are really the divine people, and according to their belief system. They had priests arrested under this theory, but let's see. Wait a second, am I saying this wrong?
Yeah, anti-Jansenist priests. Yeah,
anti-Jansenist priests. And they had this kind of an underground network, which undermined authority because they had these revolutionary pamphlets and publications. And they used public miracles as proof that they were right. And the author doesn't go into too much detail, and there was like really crazy people, I guess. And they really emphasize the spiritual and then not to have a hierarchy within the Catholic Church to decide one thing or another. Am I getting all that right? I think so.
Yep, I think so.
So then what do you get next? The suppression of the Jesuits. 1761 Parliament said no new Jesuits. Closed all their schools. So you have enough. And then ultimately Clement the 13th supported the Jesuits, but Clement the 14th in 1773 acquiesced in the suppression of the Jesuits in France for political reasons.
Yeah, because at this point in time, a lot of these countries, even if they were Catholic, they were seeing the Jesuits as agents, of the Pope, of the Papal States, rather than agents of their own kingdom. So they're like, well, I don't want the Pope telling me what to do, even if I am a Catholic king. You've got to get out. You've got to get out of here. You're subversive to my power.
So they were either imprisoned or expelled, except for, oddly enough, in Protestant Prussia and Orthodox Russia, because they didn't recognize the Pope anyway, so they forgot what they.
But I do think it's interesting. He says there were 23,000 Jesuits at the time of the suppression. That's a lot of Jesuits just throughout Europe, I'm guessing. That's a lot of people to be part of this society.
Yeah, and I think they had so many interests going, they had a lot of wealth and they had a lot of supporters and that kind of stuff. And the numbers were pretty wild. Of all the number of priests, like previous chapter talked about, the per capita priests, like in Spain, was really insane too.
Yeah, that's true. So
the French Revolution, the star of this episode, of any episode talking about politics and monstrous people. So Louis XV was a notorious adulterer, and he was refused absolution because of his serial adultery. So he ended up not being able to receive communion, in which the author points out really undermined his regal authority, because he didn't have a divine right of kings. At some point, the people are going to be saying, well, why don't we follow this guy? Well, under threat of death. But if he doesn't have the popular support, that really is a problem for the king. So Rousseau is around the same time as well, and he was a philosopher that believed in really emotional thought, and he provided a justification for violent uprisings. The author points out, and I agree. So there were reform efforts. So the successor was Louis the 16th. And he was open to reform. I read a book a little while ago, and I read some others about Robespierre. Fascinating dude.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I've told you this before, but one of my I still don't know what the context of it was. But one of my teachers in high school when we were learning about the French Revolution, said that he thought that I could be like Robespierre. Still don't know what he meant by that. I think he meant it as a compliment, but I'm not really sure.
No reference to Robespierre as a compliment.
That's true.
It's either
That's
an
true.
insult to you or he is a fool. Could be both.
Possibly.
Anyway, so yeah, I mean, Robespierre was an attorney, and he was anyway. So, but he was at the forefront of the reform efforts within the National Assembly, and so Louis XVI, and it was really a wild story because at this point the Bastille is no longer a political prison. It hadn't been for a little while, and people think, well, the revolution was because of political prisoners. No, I mean they also they had debtors' prisons back then too. They had those in the United States as well. But they had, some religious freedom and tolerance at the time. So he made the mistake. This was really his mistake. He summoned the Estates General, which hadn't been summoned since 1614. So what that was is like a power structure of this feudal enterprise. And I don't think the book really goes into a whole lot of detail of it. But there was a provision where you can get everybody together. Hey, there's a crisis. We got to solve this thing. Everybody's getting together. We're going to fix this thing.
Yeah.
They had some bad harvests. The economy's in shambles. They're heavily in debt, and they didn't have a lot of cash, and there were a lot of restrictions, so that there were no taxes on a lot of the nobility. There's no taxes on the church, but that's where all the money's flowing through. So if you're going to raise the taxes, you have to raise it on the middle to poor, and they don't have a whole lot of anything. They're starving, and so he summoned them in for like a reform. A council almost. And so you're talking about the commoners, which are really the middle class, and they're trying to push to have the nobility not lose their tax exemptions. The first estates were like the clergy and the nobility, and they were open to some reforms. And then the nobility class, so I think it's the second estate, there were some of them advocating for reforms as well. So you had a lot of these people there. They're thinking, well, the reforms will help all of us or help our group, because we tinker around these things, then we'll have an improved economy, more power, blah, 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 blah. They had no idea, no concept of what they were going to unleash.
Yeah.
And so that there of course were riots. And so there's this urgency for change because people, people were starving, and there's such a disparity of wealth and income. And so what they ended up doing is these reforms initially abolished the feudal privileges, and they created a constitutional monarchy, which a lot of people don't know, that there was a constitutional monarchy that was created briefly before the revolution.
Yeah.
And that Talleyrand, I remember correctly, he was a bishop, wasn't he? He was a clergy.
I believe so. He was president of the assembly. I know that.
The National Assemblies where we all went sideways. Because they said, okay, well, what are we going to do? We're going to reform everything, make everybody's lives better. No, we're going to kill the church. We're going to seize all the church wealth, and we're going to abolish tithes so they can't raise any money. And you're all going on the government payroll. All last one of you. You're no longer separate. We're in charge. And so that always ends well when the government says, we're taking over your religion. So, of course, Pius VI, who was Pope at the time, condemned it all, and they instituted loyalty oaths. Loyalty oaths are always a bad sign. Yeah. You have to sign a loyalty oath. You're going down a bad path, whether it's communism or the French Revolution. A lot of overlap between those two, the Bolshevik Revolution and the French Revolution. So they abolished papal taxes. Of course, remember, the Pope had authority to establish taxes on property within other countries, and the priests they passed a law that priests were now elected by the lay people, including non-Catholics.
Yep.
Because why not? We're all equal. And the maps, of course, were redrawn because that's what you're going to do. They abolished monasteries because you can't have them thinking of things that were not part of the revolution or new republic, what it was.
Yep.
Convents were disbanded. They had a tax on priestly celibacy, which seems to be a thing. And so a lot of priests ended up getting married, and they took over education. So that's secularized. And they went so far. This is kind of like a progression of laws that are passed. So it's like they go one step and they go to the next step. So they say, okay, well, you're now on the church payroll with a loyalty oath, but you can't even be a teacher. It's priests were banned, or even devout Catholics were banned from teaching anybody. Yeah. The Shaban was destroyed or disbanded or closed. And then, of course, there's an attack on marriage. Marriage is
Mm-hmm.
now a civil function. They authorize divorce as a civil function in both processes. Um, and so they had this belief and instituted as law that you're either a revolutionary um, or you're a traitor.
Yeah.
So it's revolution or you have religious
Mm-hmm.
loyalties. So if you were a devout Catholic, you couldn't be a revolutionary. You
Yeah.
couldn't be loyal to the state. It's an either or.
Mm-hmm.
And 30,000 clergy approximately left the country because they
Yeah.
wouldn't take loyalty oaths, and they were smart.
Mm-hmm.
They got out of town when the getting was good. Um, and then they were replaced by those that would take the loyalty oaths, but of course they were not welcomed within the communities when they came in because
Mm-hmm.
they're agents of this almost foreign power to them.
Yeah.
And some were met with violence when they showed up.
Mm-hmm.
So then there's a region called the Vendee, if I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah, I think so.
They rebelled. So this is in the western part of the country, and you had a civil war broke out that lasted about 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Approximately 250,000 people died. But these people were interesting because they were rebelling as much about the attack on their Catholic faith. So they would go into battle with a banner of the Sacred Heart. They'd be singing religious hymns. They'd have
Yeah.
priests with them with communion, and when they would lose a battle, they were subjected to genocide, essentially,
Mm-hmm.
including mass drownings, because it really was a religious war
Mm-hmm.
for the revolutionaries. They
Yeah.
would say, "Well, you're not religious." Well, the French Revolution was a formation of a new pagan
Mm-hmm.
religion.
Well, the point about mass drownings, I think it's important to mention. The reason they did mass drownings was because individual executions proved too slow. So it's
Sure.
not like this was their first choice. They were just like, we need to kill as many of these people as possible, just to try and exterminate them. It's insane, at the lengths that they went to, and it's really scary looking at this. I know a good bit about the French Revolution, but I haven't looked too much into the details specifically. But it's really scary how similar a lot of the rhetoric of that time now or then is similar to a lot of the rhetoric on the left now. I hope, we don't get that far. And I don't think we're even close to that extent. But the overall concerted, idea that, religion is awful. Religion is the cause of all of our problems right now. Religion is the reason why women have been oppressed while, there's been persecution against, the gays, whatever, et cetera, et cetera. If you keep blaming religion for all of this, I think we're going to start to see, a lot of that similar stuff. I hope we don't get to armed revolution, but
Well,
wild.
I think it's even more accurate analogy when you substitute the French Revolution's attack on Catholics and the Catholic Church with attacks on white supremacists, so-called white supremacists. That's really the analogy, because that's the boogeyman that all the leftists are talking about. You don't really hear them talk about, oh, we're against the Catholic Church. I mean, they are, but the real focus is white people. The white supremacists. So that you're going to take a red pill in the next week because you start seeing it. Wait a second, what? Because we know, I don't know any white supremacists.
Mm-hmm.
I've never even read any white supremacist stuff anywhere. It doesn't exist. But you know what? The evil controlling, there's some corrupt. Obviously, there's corruption in the Catholic Church before the French Revolution. People living in extreme wealth. But that wasn't the cause of all the problems. Then when they put them all on the government payroll, they solved that problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
They equalized their pay, but they didn't stop because they had to have the enemy. Because you have to have this fight, this existential fight to justify what you're doing. So they attacked the church, they attacked the monarchy, so that the king saw the writing on the wall a little too late, right? Because and I never heard this story that he only tried to flee because he wouldn't go to confession to a priest who had taken the loyalty oath to the Republic, and so then he realized, I gotta get out of town. But he was caught. They've thrown him in prison. Ultimately died. But the weird part of the political dynamic was the loyalty of the aristocracy and the monarchies, their interrelated marriages, meant that the Austrian-Hungary Empire or whatever there was in the German area, they're going to war to reinstitute the king, because and they saw that as an affront to their power and a risk to their power. They don't want people's revolutions in their area either.
Mm-hmm.
But once those foreign armies started marching, that's when Robespierre was really rising to power, and really strongly advocating for you're either loyal or you're treasonous.
Yeah.
And all means necessary to ensure your loyal people, including summary executions and summary trials.
Mm-hmm.
That's really when the terror really kicked off. They call it a terror for very good reasons, because people were killed for any reason or no reason at all.
Yeah.
And they really streamlined the use of the guillotine, which was just a mess, a physical mess, because it allows for a lot of bloodletting.
Mm-hmm.
5,000 approximately priests were imprisoned. Nuns were subject to mob violence. There were 16 Carmelite nuns that were guillotined one after the other while they were chanting a religious tune or
the Veni Creator, come Holy Spirit, or come Creator Spirit, really.
Yeah. And even devout people, if you were a devout Catholic and known to be, and you couldn't convince them that you have changed your mind, they're going to kill you too. You're sentenced to death. And so you see that kind of absolutism. People don't realize how close we are to mob violence. Humans are a strange creature in these kind of turbulent times. They'll latch on to the group identity, and they will sentence you to death and kill you.
Mm-hmm.
So even we get to the point where even the priests who took the loyalty oath, they're forbidden to do anything. They can't even practice their religion, even if they've taken the loyalty oath. And the churches are closed, many of them razed, just torn down to the ground.
Which is awful. Like Cluny, which we talked about so often. A lot of these early chapters is one of the harbors of just Western thought entirely, of where all of these documents, from ancient Greece and Rome were kept, and all of that philosophy was kept alive. These ideas that are the foundation of these quote unquote intellectuals now, they're completely raising it just because it's Catholic, just because it's Christian, because you're just harboring these ideas that are, antithetical to the state, that are treason because they're religious. It's insane.
It has to be destroyed.
Yeah.
The building can't even exist.
Yeah.
And the ironic thing is that a lot of these priests and Catholics found a home in England, where just a short time before that was illegal to be a Catholic.
Yeah.
Really illegal to be a Catholic priest. But England became a sanctuary. The English political leaders, and this was really the start of the modern conservative, Anglo-American conservative thought, because it was what Burke wrote a famous book describing the French Revolution and why it was so terrible. And that was really the start of the modern conservative movement. But anyway, so what's the end result of destroying the Catholic Church in this age of pure reason? Well, of course, you create the temple of reason from the wasn't that at Notre Dame? Didn't they convert that to the temple of reason?
I think so.
And they had new feasts. They literally had new feasts and rituals to the supreme being, which was the being of reason. And they created like a statue or a false god. They prohibited people from naming their children after saints. Instead, they wanted to name after pagan people like Brutus. And I love this the description of it. They required compulsory optimism about the revolution. You had to be positive about the revolution and what it was doing. It was miserable. Everybody was so scared. It was terrible.
Well, it's so similar to Soviet Russia's. That's really what I'm hearing there is, our communism's great, everybody. We're all doing good. I think you did gloss over, one point that I always think is very funny is that, they made a new calendar, an entirely new calendar, just because it was tied into religious observances. Yeah. But in making this calendar, and like opposing religious observances, they almost made their own new religious observances because for Sundays were forbidden to be observed in any special way. So you're still keeping the significance of Sunday by putting that rule in the books, and that fish could not be sold on Friday. So you're almost coming up with your own religious rituals that are just the opposite of whatever the religious ritual was beforehand.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, they were based upon a 10-day week.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Thermidor, which was a counter revolution that finally took Robespierre out,
Mm-hmm.
was called Thermidor because that was the month or week. I forget what it was called, but that was the time period in which that happened. I think it was a month because they renamed all the months. And that redefinition of the language, redefinition of those foundational principles within your society is necessary for a true revolutionary, both in the Soviet Union, in France, and today.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're redefining what a man or a woman is,
Mm-hmm.
that is a red strobe light. Danger, danger, danger. The revolutionaries are coming to kill your children. I'm just telling you, that's coming. You don't have children yet, but live long enough, they're going to come for your children. They're coming for my children. I mean, it's a dangerous time because you see this ratcheting up, the French Revolution. First, it's these reforms, and then it's like, okay, we're going to take control, and then we're going to destroy. Reforms, take control, destroy. So, what's the obvious end result of a revolution of the people and pure reason?
An emperor.
Emperor with complete total power by the name of Napoleon. But first, there must be war all across Europe, and tens of thousands, if not millions, of people killed in continental wars and struggles, where he declared himself ultimately as the complete authority, divine right of kings, and was it Pius VII, who was 1800-823, was elected selected as Pope in Venice because Napoleon at the time occupied Rome. And then there was ultimately a concordat, as they called it, in 1801, an agreement between Napoleon and the Pope for some accommodations to he wanted to quell the religious violence within his kingdom or empire.
Yeah.
The Pope wanted to try to moderate the persecution, which of course any deal with the devil always goes sideways, and Napoleon ends up ratcheting up the violence and the control of the church after this agreement. But so I don't know what else you want to say about Napoleon.
Yeah.
New movies.
Then the movie looks good. I'm actually looking forward to that. Just as a side comment, but I think it is interesting that in trying to work with Napoleon to gain some ground for Catholics back in France, and so they're not entirely afraid of their lives. Then in return, Napoleon seizes the Papal States a few years later. So it's like, you just can't win here for the Catholic Church at this time. It's horrible. It's an awful time.
Well, and the author mentions, Napoleon, may have been a deist, maybe a revolutionary, but his true belief was in absolute power for himself. Anything that would advance himself and his own power and aggrandizing himself was really the ultimate goal. But that's what you end up with when you have the chaos of a total and complete revolution, and the people are just like they will grasp on a heavy, a strong man or some sort of tyrant if it means they don't have to worry about getting turned over to Robespierre and his clowns.
Yeah, because I have seen, from some people, in conservative circles, have some amount of like praise for Napoleon for ending the French Revolution. To some extent, that's true, but it's like, he had no higher value. He did not value really ending the revolution. All he valued was power. That was sort of the end goal of his designs.
Yeah, I don't think I'm not an expert. I haven't read a biography of him, but I don't view him as somebody that had value, as somebody who ended the revolution. Really was ended.
Yeah.
By the time, in my opinion, by the time Napoleon seized control, it was just chaos. There really wasn't anybody in control because there was the counter revolution. And Robespierre had been killed and sent to the guillotine, and there's strike and counter strike, and there was just no control of everything. And then you had the foreign powers that were going to conquer France, and so that was really at that point it became a war in some sense of self-defense against these foreign powers that wanted to reinstitute the monarchy and crush the revolution. And so that unified the people to agree to a degree to defend the French nation from these foreign powers.
Mm-hmm.
So that has more to do with ending the revolution than anything.
Yeah.
Again, I'm no expert, but I am familiar with the rose beer and those knuckleheads. And there's the modern American left has a lot to be proud of compared to compare themselves to the French Revolutionaries, because
And it's just
same ilk.
it's just insane. I mean, because kind of my last thoughts, and we should probably wind down here. It's been a pretty long episode. But there's too many people today that just kind of see the French Revolution as, oh, well, that's when they got rid of their monarchy and then they became a democracy. And it's like, that's just so far removed from what it really was. And it's just, if more people looked at the French Revolution and compared it to now, it's exactly what you're saying. You're seeing these horrible, lines being drawn between these two groups that we're seeing with this new sort of revolutionary party sort of in America. This is what happens every single time you try to do a revolution like this. Every time you try to reform something, you pick out this bad guy that's the root cause of all evil in all of society, and we finally found the truth and we can finally get rid of it. In this case, you said, white supremacy. I think we could pick a couple things, capitalism, religion, I think is mixed in there as well, with all of these people kind of fall under that same ilk of just opposing whatever tradition holds, essentially, and just saying, that is the enemy. That is what we need to go against. This is the same rhetoric that we're seeing from these horrible people, that killed thousands of clergy in the French Revolution, just massacred anyone who didn't agree with them.
Good points.
Thank you. Do you have any other final thoughts?
There's a reason why they don't teach the details of the French Revolution in high school or college anymore, because it exposed.
It's probably pretty true. Yeah.
That's it.
It's scary stuff. All right. Well, this has been season 6, episode 15 of Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop.
And you can, of course, follow us on Twitter at ULMTD Opinions.
Sorry to talk so much.
No, that was a good episode. And I always like to hear your thoughts on the French Revolution. It's like the third time we've talked about it on the podcast, at least.
I'm fascinated by it.
Yes.
I'm terrified of it.
Yeah.
Because there were a number of brave people. Like the Carmelite nuns. They were so brave, but they were killed anyway. Yeah. And how do you watch them? How do you watch? Was it 16 of them
16.
go to their death? And it's a public setting. These were public executions. They would pay people to attend the National Assembly, and so they would get drunk and all that, and then they would attend these executions, and to see these women, one after the other, get their heads lopped off, literally just lopped off in front of the whole cheering crowd, and not be turned away by after the first one or the second or 15th. It's like, can you save any of them? Nope, they were cheering it on, and it's frightening what we can do to each other. It is with each other. It's scary.
It's horrible.
And we're not different. The people that live today are the same as the people that lived in 1787.
True. Very true. Very scary.
Discouraging. I'm having nightmares tonight. I'm gonna crack this.